Hello, everyone. We are going to go ahead and get started. Nice to see so many beautiful faces on the screen today. Thank you all for joining us. I'm Katora Butler-Reed. I'm one of the Building Power Node leaders alongside Mr. Kareem Scales, who I'm so happy to be bringing up in a few minutes. So first, I just want to say thank you all for joining us at our first call, I think, of the year. So this is extremely exciting. Please make sure that you're dropping comments and dropping where you're coming from. We have so many people coming from all over the state in the past that we've had, and we're really excited to be having this conversation. Today is our Let Us Speak for Ourselves, how frontline communities are shaping environmental justice policy. We have some amazing speakers today who are going to be talking about what's really happening in Black communities. How do we move forward? What are we already doing? But also kind of shedding light into a lot of the areas that a lot of times people ignore. So you all are in for a treat. But first, I want to get into a little bit of a deeper background into Cancer Free Economy Network. So, at our root, we are a network that unites healthcare providers, scientists, community organizers, policy experts. A lot of times when we think about the work, I know a lot of people say, what is the work? What does that look like? And what it looks like sometimes, especially when people are attacking our bodies, our mental, etc. But there are also people who can do something about it. That's what unity really looks like. So when we think about Cancer Free Economy Network, a lot of what we do is cultivate an inclusive movement to promote healthy environments so that no one is getting sick because of toxic chemicals, whether it's somewhere that they live, where they learn, where they work, etc. And we do so, of course, in preventative measures. So it does look like us having those specific conversations with scientists who can kind of really tell us, okay, well, it's lead in these areas, or it's this and that and the third. I'm not a scientist. I'm the community organizer person. So of course I can't tell you all of the chemicals that are affecting us. But what I can tell you is that I'm going to fight for the people in my neighborhoods and my communities, and the people who maybe they don't have the education to really know about the toxic chemicals that are really impacting us. So it looks like taking those preventative measures. It also looks like working in these different departments, such as policy, et cetera. It looks like making sure that we are combating whatever it is that, we're dealing with in regards to cancer, in regards to clean water, clean air, clean soil, et cetera. So when we think about Cancer Free Economy Network, it's really connecting a vast group of people to just work against what we're facing. So, shifting specifically into the building power node leader, being a building power node leader, myself and Kareem, this is where the real community-led solutions comes from. A lot of times when we think about change, when we think about wins, it's happening because there are people who have their boots on the ground. And I'm not talking about where those fans at. I'm talking about organizers every day doing the work. A lot of times, whoever is closest to the solution is really the people who are closest to the problem. So that's why we think it's really important to be led by BIPOC communities. Well, I'll just say it out specifically, Black, Indigenous, people of color. A lot of us are disproportionately affected by cancer, whether it be from petrochemical plants, whether it be from just other environmental, racial factors, etc. So like I said, I'm not the science person, and I think Kareem could agree with me as well. We're not the science people, but we work with them to make sure that when we're advocating for people, we have the data and statistics to prove that. And then we also have the legal experts and policy experts to make sure that it doesn't happen again. So for community-led solutions, of course, it starts with addressing the root causes. So that's where all the data and the science come from. Then it goes to organizing. How do we create a real plan for that? And then it goes forth to, okay, These are the solutions. This is how other people are creating healthy alternatives to the issues that we're facing. So it's a lot of different factors as to how we create a good strategy, but we also have to understand that that strategy comes from so many different places. We started with our agroecology panel discussion that we had sometime last year, where people are building their own crops and they're figuring out a way to work with each other as a community, and making it sustainable in areas that aren't typically sustainable. Then we had our what I forgot what we called it specifically, but it was basically a conversation where I live in Cancer Alley. And so we had real grassroots organizers and advocates and activists. It's a difference in how we combat this work, but real people from Cancer Alley, people in St. James, St. John Parish, New Orleans, etc. And they were able to really just kind of share how do they combat it, how are they winning these legal fights as well, but also kind of understanding like the real impact that cancer has, and sometimes the effects might even seep to maternal rates, et cetera. So it's all connected, and that's why as Cancer Free Economy Network, we are here to bring all the pieces together so we can make informed decisions. So today, however, we wanted to focus on because we started off in California, then went to Louisiana, now we're going to Michigan, Grand Rapids, etc. Because there are so many different concerns in those areas that people have just ignored. A lot of people have heard about the Flint water crisis, but some people, I think maybe it went to the back of their heads. Maybe they just forgot about it. Maybe they thought people didn't really still need help, but this is still a dire issue in our communities. And so if not us leading the charge to address it, to acknowledge it, but also to realize that we have to gather with each other to really do something about it, then if not us, then who? So I am so happy to bring up my partner in crime, Kareem Scales, who's going to be moderating and facilitating this conversation. I've had the pleasure of working with Kareem for about a year or so now. And when I tell you the background from NAACP, the background in his own consulting firm, really doing this work for over 20 years, healthcare, labor unions, nonprofit. Now, if you a labor union organizer, you are something serious. You are nothing to play with. And so this is a person who really leads in this work, and just the leadership that he provides us as a team, the leadership that he provides in his community, but also knowing exactly who to bring a part of this conversation, which is why I'm extremely excited to be having it and be listening into the panel discussions that we're going to be having today, because he knew exactly who needed to be at the table and who needed to be uplifted. So without further ado, I introduce our facilitator slash moderator slash cancer-free economy extraordinaire, Kareem Scales. Woo.
Well, thank you, Katura. Amazing intro. I don't know if I'm deserving of such an introduction, but let's give a thanks to Katura for kicking us off today, and I want to give a huge thanks to you all for joining us and being a part of this very intentional and important discussion. As Katura mentioned, my name is Kareem Scales. I serve alongside her as the Building Power Node co-lead here for the Cancer Free Economy Network. Have served in that role now for going on 2 years, and so excited to continue to be in this space where we can highlight not just the injustices, the cancer disparities, but also some of the community-led solutions that folks like Darren, Nayyirah, and Sergio are leading in their communities. And so we're super excited to dig into the conversation today. And with that said, we wanted to just do a little bit of level setting, right? Before we jump into the panel, really quick, if we can go to the next slide, just want to talk a little bit, provide a little bit of historical context in terms of what we're talking about. And so, um, environmental justice in Michigan and across the country, as you all has been an overwhelming issue for a long time now. We know that geographic disparities and environmental burdens continue to affect communities of color more predominantly, as well as underserved communities, and not just in Michigan, right, throughout the country and throughout the world. And so, uh, we just want to kind of level set and just share a little bit about um, some of the issues. We're talking about things like air quality, proximity to highways, semi truck traffic. I'm excited to hear from Sergio about some of the work that we've led here in Grand Rapids and as it relates to semi truck routes, and its connection to underserved and BIPOC communities. Lead exposure is a huge one. We know that lead is a major issue in terms of water equality in areas like Flint and throughout the country. And then we know climate vulnerability is a major issue as well. We always say that, at least I always say that, and when we talk environmental justice, we can't really talk environmental justice. We can't talk climate justice without talking environmental justice, right? Because the same folks who are hit first and worst in terms of climate are the same communities that are hit the hardest in terms of the environmental injustice. And so while progress has been made through civil rights agreements, through policy reform, there's still a whole lot of work to do. And so we're excited to share some of those successes with you today, but also highlight some of the ongoing issues and what you can do in your communities to help support this movement here in Michigan and throughout the world. Next slide. We can take a little bit of deeper dive into, I'll be really brief with these slides because I think we really want to get into the conversation, but um, next slide really speaks to Detroit, right? Environmental burdens, specifically in Black neighborhoods. And I know Darren will be able to speak to this, but Detroit zip code 48217 is in Southwest Detroit. And there's been some extreme disparities that have been identified there in terms of uh, environmental injustices. We're looking at 92, that zip code in these areas, 48217 and Delray 48219 is where 92% of residents of people of color reside. And these neighborhoods face 78% higher particulate matter concentrations than the state average. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I know Darren will jump in, but I believe 48217 is the most polluted zip code I know in the state and probably in the country. Health impacts are severe, things like asthma, things like disproportionate cancer rates. Those individuals have emergency department visits in 48217 2.4 times higher than the overall rate in Michigan. And so this is a major issue, right? We know in August, excuse me, 2024, there was a civil rights agreement that mandates new air monitoring stations in that zip code. And so we'll be excited to hear about some of the work that Darren is doing out in that area. Next slide. Well, next slide talks really about some of the community responses and health impacts. This slide just kind of highlights some of the disparities, right? And so while direct cancer rates by neighborhood, it's still hard data to find. This slide at least can show where we rank in comparison to what the EPA determines as acceptable risk. You see a huge disparity there in Detroit and 48217. And not as much here in Flint and Grand Rapids, but if you look closely, it's still above what the EPA determines as acceptable risk. And in my opinion, and through my work in this space, what they determine as acceptable is probably already higher uh, than what it should be as it relates to folks coming down with illnesses like cancer and other issues. And so community has led responses across these three cities. There was a East Side Health Impact Assessment that trained 48 residents in air monitoring techniques, documented 22 odor complaints. There's a major issue as we talk about environmental justice across the board as it relates to proximity of industry within direct proximity to communities and residential communities. And in Grand Rapids, there was an initiative where they deployed 30 high resolution sensors measuring multiple pollutants, as well as a project that I had the pleasure of leading and working alongside Darren, Sergio, and others that was called the 49507 project, where we recently installed 7 air quality monitors in the 49507 zip code. And then lastly, just to cover a little bit more information as it relates to Flint, right? And the legacy of systemic disinvestment. You all have seen, for those of you who are in Michigan, across the country. I know we're all familiar with the Flint water crisis. As the data shows, and I know will correct me if this is inaccurate, but as they've replaced 98% of lead service lines, there's still a number of major hotspots, right? And as you all could guess, those are predominantly where Black residents, as well as those in poverty. So 68% Black residents and a 42% poverty rate. MDHHS reports that blood levels in Flint have decreased, but still remain elevated in comparison to other counties like Genesee County, where obviously, isn't predominantly Black and underserved. Environmental justice advocates note that 72% of the remaining lead exposure cases occur in households that earn less than 25,000 annually. So back to those in poverty, again, people in color being most disproportionately impacted. The data clearly suggests that there's still a lot of work to do. And then there was a $2.3 million restoration equity program that prioritizes soil replacement for 600 households that were built prior to 1980, and that is hoping to bring more free vegetable garden installations and other solutions as it relates to remediating some of these issues. And hope to hear about some of that more during the conversation. And I think we got one final slide that'll talk a little bit about some of the things happening here in Grand Rapids. So there's the Plaster Creek watershed, which is directly connected to a largely populated Hispanic community. There's a lot of limited English proficiency in those households and 48% higher nitrate concentrations than other Grand Rapids areas, right? There's also the South Side Industrial Corridor, where 69% Black residents live near the Butterworth landfill. And there's extremely elevated levels of PM 2.5 that are 22% above EPA standards and 18% childhood asthma rate versus the 9% citywide. Tree density and is a major issue as well. I often speak to tree density and the intersection inequalities as it relates to that. There are initiatives taking place from organizations like Plaster Creek Stewards, Friends of Grand Rapids Parks to increase the tree density, but there's still a long way to go. And then speaking to the project that I briefly mentioned as it relates to the 49507 project, where we installed those 7 air quality monitors, after we collected data over a period of months, it revealed that 41.5%, almost half of the days, experienced unhealthy to very unhealthy quality with monitors near traffic, industry, as I previously mentioned. And so that was intended just to really kind of set the stage, right? I'm sure that those of you in the room here are familiar. That's why you join this conversation. But we always want to start off just kind of level setting and giving you all kind of some context. But this is really what I'm most excited about here is hearing from folks who are directly engaged, who I've had the pleasure of working alongside all three in some capacity over the years. And so, with that said, I think with no further ado, let's go ahead and do a quick intro. I'll share a little bit of background on our panelists. Where you're in for a very insightful discussion with some of the folks leading this work, and not just in Michigan. Each of these individuals are involved at a national level in this work and have been engaged for a number of years. And so I'm just excited to call these folks colleagues and friends. We're excited to hear from a good friend of mine, Darren Riley, who's the co-founder and CEO of JustAir Solutions. We have Sergio Cira-Reyes, who serves as the climate justice catalyst for the Urban Core Collective, alongside Ms. Nayyirah Shariff, who's the director of Flint Rising. And so again, share a little brief bio, and then we'll go ahead and jump into the discussion. So first, we want you to meet Nayyirah Shariff. She is the director of Flint Rising. She has extensive experience in grassroots leadership. She helped co-found the Flint Democracy Defense League back in 2011 to confront emergency management. And I know you all think in 2011, the Flint water crisis wasn't made public until much later than that. But those who've been on the ground have known that this has been an issue for a long time. She's also a established water crisis advocate featured on Democracy Now. Very tons of experience in coalition building, and then also an experienced campaigner with over 10 years of organizing experience at the local, state, and national level. Next, we have Darren Riley, who is the co-founder and CEO of JustAir Solutions. He is leading JustAir, which is a Detroit-based environmental tech company that protects our daily 20,000 breaths. I learned that from Darren. Every day we take over 20,000 breaths, right? And so, uh, based on what's in the air, those one of those 20,000 breaths can be the one that can cause issues like asthma and things we'll be talking about. Darren has a personal motivation to this work. He developed asthma while living in a heavily polluted Southwest Detroit zip code back in his mid-20s, and he brings technical expertise as a graduate of Carnegie Mellon with over a decade of software engineering experience. And last but not least, want to introduce Sergio Cira-Reyes, climate justice catalyst of the Urban Core Collective here in Grand Rapids. Sergio has indigenous roots. He's an immigrant from Mexico. Don't let me get that wrong, Sergio. I'm gonna fumble those words. The land of Puripecas, indigenous people. I think I said that right. Sergio is a climate justice catalyst. He leads climate initiatives at Urban Core Collective. I've had the pleasure of working alongside Sergio, alongside another organization where we both serve called C4, Community Collaboration on Climate Change. He's a community organizer, advocates for Latin communities and outdoor and environmental justice spaces, and he brings diverse experience across a number of different areas, including social work, education, community engagement, in other areas as well. So with that said, I want to go ahead and bring our panelists on camera, and let's go ahead and jump into the discussion. I'm excited to have you all taking the time out. I know everybody has busy schedules, and so if we can, let's go ahead and center our panelists and jump into the discussion. We will save time for participants in the room to ask questions. And so if you could just save those questions, you can put them in the chat, write them down. We'll allow you to come off camera. But with that said, let's go ahead and just jump in. I'm just going to throw a question out there, and either of you can kind of take the lead on it. But first and foremost, let's talk a little bit about environmental injustice in Michigan and cancer disparities. And so the first question I like to throw out there is, from your lens in your communities, what environmental justice challenges are showing up most urgently in your work right now? And the second part to that question is, how are weak permitting systems or regulatory gaps allowing this harm to continue? Anybody can jump in.
I can jump on first. First of all, thank you for this great opportunity to share what's happening here in Grand Rapids and how we're experiencing. I'm going to share some examples of what I see on cancer, which is something I had an opportunity to do a little bit of research. We normally talk about the impacts of the pollution that's taking place and the causes of climate change and how people of color are first impacted while they contribute the least to climate change. But in terms of instances of cancer, there's three situations in Grand Rapids that I want to highlight, and that's there is a medical facility, or they might have closed now, but there was a medical facility called Viant Medical in the west side of Grand Rapids. They were actually in 2019. They looked into this, and people in the surrounding neighborhood of this medical facility, they're producing medical equipment, were experiencing cancer rates at the highest level in the entire state. And so that was an alarming thing that happened. And this only came to light because they were also doing something similar, I think somewhere in Chicago and in Illinois. And then the federal government said, well, what other facilities do you have? Let's look into that. And that's how we found out that was happening. Another issue that's happening where cancer chemicals are being produced that are in our communities being exposed to are PFAS in our community in three areas that I want to note. The first one is the incinerator that Grand Rapids has an incinerator, which has been greenwashed as as waste energy facility. There is PFAS that has been found in the water that seeps down at the bottom of that of the incinerator. There's PFAS, uh, the highest concentration of people of color, the Roosevelt Park neighborhood in Grand Rapids. There was PFAS that was found there from a factory there that operated in the past. There's also PFAS that was found in a neighboring city in Rockford, but this is in a waterway, in a watershed that a local tannery that was dumping in the forest, and they buried the um, PFAS chemicals, and it made its way into the groundwater. And so that's happening. That's another cancer causing chemical that our community is being exposed to now. There's also another issue that's happening in Grand Rapids, which is a truck route that exists in the same Roosevelt Park neighborhood, where hundreds of trucks a day pass by in a neighborhood, like in front of homes, a 2-lane road. It's a small road, they barely fit, but they pass by at a high rate of speed, and that's hundreds of them. There's 4 schools in this neighborhood, and also they're like the fumes from the diesel burning is also they're being exposed to. Unfortunately, when we think of cumulative impacts from the smokestack of the incinerator, it's the same neighborhood. So that's another source for cancer causing chemicals. And then in the past, there's another. Our office actually is right next to a site where there was vapor intrusion, where there was a place where the cleaners, dry cleaners, that were dumping the chemicals into the ground, and now there's these pipes that are coming out of the ground in this building where they're filtering the chemicals. And so those are instances that are happening related to cancer, that we are kind of have been following in Grand Rapids, and it's kind of related to to what you do. So I'll stop there.
Oh, thank you, Sergio. You covered so much. We did experience a little bit of technical issues, but it got better as you continue to talk. But I think you touched on so much. The semi truck traffic, as well as the issue as it relates to the cleaners and the vapor intrusion, and these things are still existing. I mean, and I'm sure nothing new, right? We see these things, unfortunately, in other communities as well. I want to throw that question out now to Darren or Nayyirah. What's happening in your communities as it relates to challenges? And specifically, I'd love to hear anything you can share as it relates to regulatory gaps that allow these things to continue.
Yeah, I could jump in real quick. Can y'all hear me well? Kind of in the hotel room. Okay. So I think a couple things. I think you said it really well, Sergio, just around cumulative impacts. So folks who are, I think probably folks in the room have heard that term, but just to reiterate, our body just don't let one pollutant or one thing in at a time. We're kind of overburdened by all these, different pollutants hitting us all at once. And so how that shows up, and here in Detroit, is that you can have a whole block of folks, and this is, stories that we hear from residents, and in my example, my personal experience is a case of that, where you all come from different genetic backgrounds, but everyone has similar disease or similar cancers, right? There's something, definitely in the air, something that really causing that to happen. So from the regulatory side of things, and again, in Detroit, we have, the trucking traffic from Canada, we have local point sources from steel, from gas and oil, whole 9 yards. So, and I just see someone put on the State of the Air report out from the Lung Association. I definitely encourage folks to check that out. Detroit was ranked 6th in the worst cities in the U.S. on that report for particulate. So it's a lot of work to be done. On the regulatory side of things, I want to comment there. I kind of mentioned the cumulative impact. We don't really have a good grasp or a health study backing an opportunity to really push that policy. That's what we're hearing. I think there needs to be more work around that space to develop an index to understand how we can measure different pollutants and how that really impacts the body. So like today, if we have moderate PM2.5, moderate NO2, moderate CO, moderate everything, that's okay. They're all below the threshold, but how does all that moderate really come together through one breath? I think that's something we need to pay attention to. Number two is the self-accountability model that we often see in states. Some states and certain do not require that, but self-reporting or saying, hey, this is how we're going to use this equipment and we're going to use it effectively in the right way. We know that in practice, that's not always true. And so when you go for air quality permits and you're saying modeling out what the expected pollution is from this device, that also has assumption that everybody's going to do the right, perform the right action on the right day, do the proper scrubbing, just like watering down demolition. When you drive down the road, you see all this dust, people should be watering it down. They're not. So all I have to say is that it's one thing to do permits on what we say best practices should be, but in reality, how are we actually checking to make sure that's actually true? And then the last thing kind of tied into that, the self-reporting, is that we need independent reporting. I think that's where the community comes in. You know, we're really focused on the community monitoring aspect, but I really do envision a world where, similar to like kind of the police camera body cams, you know, before that, it's police's word versus, you know, whatever's going on in the investigation. But now this body cam kind of acts as an independent source to see what's really going on, and seeing how both parties are behaving. So when we're looking at the intersection of trust between community and industry, I really think it's really important to really level up that independent and really push towards an independent analysis of what's really happening, and make sure companies are doing what they said they're doing. So I'll stop right there, but I just want to kind of share that light on the policy side.
No, thanks, Darren. Yeah, I think you touched on a number of things as you talk about asthma, right? And the conversation around cumulative impacts. I've been sharing with folks, and I know a lot of us can relate. We've all had some family member or been directly impacted by asthma. And at least for us, for me, we were in our communities, we were always just told you have asthma because it's hereditary, right? And so now, as we've been more engaged in this work, we know that it's a direct result of proximity to industry, railroad tracks, highways, and the major issues in terms of air inequality. So, no, thanks, Darren, for sharing those insights. Nayyirah, want to hear from you. What's happening out in Flint? What's the most pressing issues right now, and where are those gaps showing up in your work?
Yeah, like hopefully y'all can hear me. Can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Been Tetrising myself around this hotel place. So thanks for inviting me. It's nice to be on the panel of all of my, I would say, like, very close friends and colleagues and people in the struggle in Michigan. Um, coming from Flint, I would say like there are really like two tracks. Like the track that people most know about is like the water crisis and the aftermath of that, because that's one way that Flint has become part of kind of like the national zeitgeist, especially as we are approaching this Friday, the 11-year anniversary since the switch. To the Flint River. And I would say that track is more the legacy. And both of these things I'm going to talk about is like more kind of like legacy stuff, because like one thing around the Flint water crisis is that it was bigger than just the lead exposure, because like for 18 months, we were basically drinking untreated water from the Flint River that has had like a history of various industries dumping in it. And one of those industries, which kind of leads more to my second track, is General Motors. General Motors, like Flint is the birthplace of General Motors. And like for decades, General Motors like saw Flint as its kind of private playground where it could just do whatever it wanted, like without any sort of impunity. And after the Great Recession, for folks who may be younger than me. Like the auto industry basically was like on its way to being bankrupt, and General Motors was one of those. And what they did after emerging from bankruptcy is um, spinning off all of their bad debt into Racer Trust, and that included several sites within Flint. And so, like, there's a lot of legacy pollution from those sites because they intentionally made the decision to basically just cap, which is basically just throwing like a bunch of asphalt over like all of those retention tanks. And so like one of the legacies from that is like we have like dioxin intrusion in the neighborhood, and we have PFAS that is just like, just everywhere as well. But I would say like one of the regulatory gaps is um, you know, lack of data does not mean that there isn't a problem, because data itself can be manipulated. And and I would say like there are no health-based standards. Like none of this stuff is like none of these standards that we are talking about is not rooted in any type of like health policies. Is basically rooted in capitalism and like manufacturing and what they are, like permitted to emit. So I think that that needs to be more of a paradigm shift, and especially like when it comes to like lead in drinking water. People think that that is something that is a static number, like it is the same all the time, and it is not. Like it is something that can be very dynamic. Most likely your blood pressure. You don't have the same blood pressure at all points of the day through all the activities. Number is not static, and I think people also need to be thinking about that when it comes to our drinking water.
No, thank you, Nayyirah, and thanks for calling that out. I think you said the 11th anniversary of the switch, right? And the work is still ongoing. Just great, lot covered from all three of you. I can think of a number of things to pull from what you all shared. But let's go ahead and transition. I want to talk a little bit more around how these environmental exposures are showing up in communities' health outcomes specifically. We also want to touch on what's being missed when policymakers fail to connect pollution to public health. And so I think you just kind of hit it on the head around data, Nayyirah. There's often a disconnect between pollution data and actual health impacts. And so I want to take a deeper dive with each of you to learn a little bit more about what does that look like where you live? How are illnesses like cancer, asthma, or reproductive issues linked to environmental conditions that we are all collectively fighting? And if there's any stories, studies, or personal experiences that you think decision makers should continue, um, or are there personal experiences do you think decision makers continue to overlook, right? As we're sharing our stories, what are the areas where we're feeling unheard and there should be more efforts contributed towards? So I know that was a loaded question, but really we'll put it in the chat as well. But like, is it specific to issues like cancer, asthma, reproductive issues? How are they linked to environmental conditions that you all are fighting? And again, the stories or personal experiences that continue to be overlooked.
I'll jump on in and do the back to back. I want to say, like, first of all, like the number one number attached to your name is not your social security number or even your credit score. It's like your zip code, and depending on where you're at, like maybe even like your census tract, because that is going to determine a lot of health outcomes. And like I too, like I was kind of smiling like when you were sharing I'll say Darren's origin story, because I feel like I have a similar story. I grew up in a neighborhood that not only was like the park that I played at, I found out as an adult was like a dumping ground for DuPont. but also the it was very close to Consumers Energy has a wood waste incinerator, and um, and I didn't know this story until I was an adult, because like growing up, I went to school and like everybody got up to go get their inhaler shot, and like as a child, like I had asthma and I basically was like sitting on the couch, like looking at kids playing, like as I was getting my nebulizer treatments. And so like that, I felt that that was normal until like I moved to like basically this majority white community. And then it wasn't everybody getting up to go get their inhaler treatments. And that is something that really stuck with me because also like as an adult, I found out that people did fight back against the building and permitting of Genesee Power Station, which is like one owned by the sister company of Consumers Energy. And it was actually used as a test case for Title VI. And, like it took like over 24 years for there to be a response for that. And all of the people who were fighting against that and lived in that neighborhood died. They died of cancers and the different types of cancer. And so, um, and I also want to lift up, like during the water crisis, like we would canvas and go door to door and ask people like how they were impacted, and people just volunteered all of this stuff, which was like all types of like horror stories of people who had like multiple miscarriages, like their animals dying, uh, people getting caught up into child protective services because their children had very high elevated blood levels. And and I would say like one that's like kind of like this failure in which you see like this punitiveness of the state, when the state is itself like responsible, is supposed to be responsible for the regulation and like the accountability, which they never have any accountability. Like like the state of Michigan and their regulatory environmental agency is basically like they're in business and the business is the corporations, it's not the residents who are living in those neighborhoods that are going to be bearing like the burden of everything. And so I feel like, like, and I've organized like multiple like bus trips of residents who are directly impacted, speaking to lawmakers, and I feel like there's always this falling, like there's everything's always falling short because they're going to be rolling with the corporations. Like the corporations are giving them money at all levels, and like the voices of the people are just like falling short because there's this hope that when people like naively like we think that people have the information, they're going to do the right thing, but we see that like people don't care about the right thing, like they care about the capitalism of it all. And so like that's the way that they're kind of rolling, because it's like we don't really have like a level, like a way to like have like that threat to like have that true accountability, which is like for them not to be elected anymore. Check.
Drops the mic. No, no, I mean, you cover so much, and I appreciate you being vulnerable enough to share, your personal story as it relates to asthma. To that point, I didn't have asthma, but growing up, it was like, I mean, literally everybody had an inhaler. And again, it was the story that was told is that this is hereditary, right? And so, but I think you called out something else that I think deserves more light shed, and that's the proximity and the relationship with those who are supposed to be, uh, holding these entities accountable in their relationships as it relates to the corporations, right? When we look at, uh, you know, campaign contributions. We did some, those of us who are involved at that level, we know that, some of our energy providers are the largest contributors to campaigns every year, right? And I know there are efforts right now to ban those folks from contributing to these political campaigns. So much covered there, Nayyirah, but want to shift to Sergio or Darren. Anything you want to share as it relates to the question posed, really just taking a deeper dive into, how are these illnesses linked, um, and what stories or studies that you have been a part of that are being overlooked. And this is a safe space here, you all. I mentioned that as we were kind of planning this call. We're intentional about folks being able to be themselves and share the real deal information. So no pressure, but I'll kick it over to Sergio or Darren if there's anything you want to share. If
Yeah,
not,
yeah.
we can move on. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'll be real quick. I appreciate you now you're sharing kind of your experience with your journey with asthma. And I definitely had the inverse. Like I'm originally from Houston, Texas. I failed to mention that earlier. Didn't have asthma. I hooped my whole life. I probably count maybe two to three. My memory's probably bad, but two or three folks I remember pulling out an inhaler, hooping my whole life in Houston, Texas, right? Until I left for school. And I moved to Detroit. It's coming up on my 10th year. Almost a decade being in Detroit, and developed asthma 2 years. Moved to 49, well, not 49, 48209, one of those zip codes that you shared on the map. And in 2 years, had struggles breathing. Never had that issue in my whole life. Didn't know what was going on. Thought I was having pneumonia or something, whatever. But after the diagnosis, I think it opened my eyes to, oh man, this is normal here. But coming from not a place where it wasn't normal, at least me growing up, and how normalized, like something is wrong there. So I can see how folks can get caught in the normalcy of where you live, where your place is, and everyone is dealing with the same struggle. That struggle must be the reality, right? And this is like a wild story. Is like if I forget, my inhaler, I go to the basketball court. I mean, probably shouldn't be doing this, obviously, but it's crazy. I'm confident that somebody at the basketball court is going to have an inhaler. Like that's kind of a wild reality to think about, right? Which leads me to the next point, and this is on what maybe policymakers are missing and kind of combining like our own personal agency over our health is I always feel like when I have an asthma exacerbation, like I feel guilty, like it's my problem, right? Like I didn't treat myself. I didn't do my treatment. Maybe I'm not, up to date, which yeah, is a responsibility of dealing with that, right? But there's also responsibility of an environment that I can't control that's impacting me, that's causing me to do, these necessities to keep myself healthy and hopefully live a long life. And I think in our community, oftentimes the illness that we oftentimes don't share, and I can speak more prominently in our communities being vulnerable here. We're not always open with health is that we're all kind of holding it inside, like we have to take care of this and not be expressive of. There's other things that are causing these issues, which leads me to my next point of the on the policymaker side, and I hate that we live in this very capitalistic, economic driven world, and I think policymakers are not making the connection of how this is actually hitting at their own pockets, right? Got people missing days at school, kids not able to learn what they need to learn because they're thinking about the exaggeration. Like I can imagine how a kid is learning, thinking about where's my inhaler, right? Um, you got people dying early, not being able to put food on the table because they just have a low quality of life where they should be well able bodied and working. So I think and also the medical bills of cancers and all these other picking up your inhaler prescription and where to go, right? So all I have to say is that finding better ways, or not better ways, but finding ways to just elevate that to policymakers and even corporates if you can, like how like your workforce, where people are, treat your people with decency so they can in their communities with decency to make sure that they can come to work healthy and contribute to your workplace or whatnot. I know again it sounds very economic and capitalistic, but when we talk about what's happening in reality, I think there's some opportunities to tie that health to the economics to try to move some folks. But I'll stop right there.
Thank you, Darren. A lot unpacked there as well. I want to now that we've kind of, talked a little bit about direct impacts, well, before I move on, really quick, Sergio, did you want to touch on that one, or are you okay to move on to the next question?
We can move on to the next question.
Okay. Yeah. So I want to transition a little bit and hear a little bit more about the work that you all are engaged in, right? Um, there's a lot of efforts that are happening on the ground, a lot of frontline organizations doing incredible work with very limited resources. And so I want to hear from you all about some of the amazing work that you all are leading in your organizations, but also talk a little bit about what do we need to shift, right? Is it philanthropy? Is it public funding? Or is it policy? Like, where should our priorities be to ensure that your work and our work is sustainable? So anybody can jump in. And then the last piece we'd like to touch on is, are there certain funding models or partnerships that you all are excited about, that you're hopeful that'll help contribute to the ongoing work? So really just to kind of sum that up, yeah. Tell me a little bit about the work that you all are doing, and where do you see the shifts that need to happen? Maybe we'll start off with you, Sergio.
Sure. I'll stick to kind of related to what I mentioned. I mentioned that there was like PFAS in our community. There's multiple sources of air pollution that's coming from the smokestack for the incinerator that we have, truck traffic. There's also fumes from producing medical equipment that it was causing elevated instances of cancer. I think 11 times the national average in this specific community. And so some of the work that brought us to this was when we first started to get involved as interveners with the Michigan Public Service Commission. We were invited to do this by Empower Michigan, a coalition that was looking at the integrated resource plan. That's a plan that the Michigan Public Service Commission, the regulatory agency that oversees the utilities, the investor-owned utilities, and this plan is where they submit to the commission how they're going to provide power to the public for the next 15 years. And that's where we started learning about all of this, about energy, about what's happening. In 2023, policymakers passed a law carving out an exemption for this, actually categorizing the incinerator as renewable energy and burning trash. Like, it's not, they're burning trash and they're using it to power some of the buildings in the city. And so we had a press conference. Actually, Kareem, you were part of that press conference. We started looking at what communities were downwind from that smokestack, and it turned out to be the Roosevelt Park neighborhood. We also happened to be engaged in some conversations with one of the neighbor associations in that or in that neighborhood, the Roosevelt Park Neighborhood Association. They applied for a grant to a local foundation, and we started sharpen the safe and healthy Roosevelt Park neighborhood to reduce truck traffic in that neighborhood. And up until then, we were looking constantly at Detroit and Flint and other parts of the state where people in their community were like advocates, they're organizers, and we have so much respect for them. And we're thinking like, what's happening in our neck of the woods, and we didn't realize it until we started digging deeper. And then we ran into a study by the University of Michigan, sanctioned by the Environmental Justice Coalition, looking at factors at all census tracts across the state of Michigan, looking at how much investment goes into that neighborhood and the specific census tracts, or disinvestment, and also the concentration of people of color and the exposure to environmental health risks and hazards. Surprisingly, the census tract in the entire state that was the number one. So the least investment, the most disinvestment from local government, and the most health factors and increased the concentration of people of color was this census tract 39, which is the Roosevelt Park neighborhood. And so we started digging more into that. And so um, the cumulative impact, like I mentioned before, we started working with Roosevelt Park Neighborhood Association. We created the Sharpen Coalition, and we started kind of looking at how we can move the truck route. We started engaging with local elected officials with the city. So that's been some of the work. We then partnered with the Grand Valley State University. Somebody, a professor there, applied for a grant, and we got it. And they started collecting. They started, and the grant was to get air monitors, and so now we're in the process of learning how to use them, training people how to use them, so that we could have them more localized, comparing the Roosevelt Park neighborhood to other neighborhoods in community, as opposed to like the broader work that that Darren's been doing. So it's more like localized. And then we started intervening with the Michigan Public Service Commission. There is another IRP that Consumers Energy, that's publicly the investor-owned utility that provides Grand Rapids and this half of the state with energy. They're going to submit their new integrated resource plan next year, and so we're going to intervene in that case, which means like we're going to push for them to switch to renewables, push for them to stop obstructing community solar, and getting them to keep the coal plants that they were due to close. And also we're looking into how can data centers exist here, given that Michigan legislators are allowing them to come here and giving them the tax breaks, and in so doing, giving the utility companies an excuse to say, look, there's a sudden demand of energy for energy in Michigan, and so maybe we should build more coal plants, maybe we should build more gas plants. And we're working on doing some analysis with the Union of Concerned Scientists to see how we can what a scenario might look like without the utility companies building more or keeping power plants open that are the worst pollution and causes of cancer and asthma and heart disease in community. Those are some of the organizing efforts, and we hope to bring in the public by bringing them into the fold, by telling them what the Michigan Public Service Commission is, what they do, how they can get involved, and holding public meetings so that people can connect with us and tell us what they want for the future of energy generation, clean energy generation, instead of relying on Consumers Energy to do their own community engagement and then going to the commission and saying, people love us, they want more of this, they want reliable energy, because we can't trust the wind, we can't trust the sun. Sometimes it's cloudy, sometimes it's not windy. And so this is some of the work that we're engaging in Grand Rapids around this area.
Thank you, Sergio. You covered a lot. Sergio's been doing some amazing work engaging folks on the ground with the Michigan Public Service Commission as it relates to their IRP process. Lots of a huge need for folks to become more involved and engaged with those efforts. And one other thing you brought up, Sergio, I think we haven't mentioned yet, as it relates to the incinerator. Sergio's right. I helped participate in that initiative last year, or when, I forget. Yeah, that was last year sometime. And what we learned throughout that process, the last municipally owned incinerator in the whole state of Michigan is right here in Grand Rapids, a predominantly people color, Black, and underserved community. And so again, thanks, Sergio, for sharing those insights. I know we're having I'm hearing so much great conversation from all our panelists. I want to open it up for questions from the audience, but before we do so, I'd like to get at least one, maybe squeeze in one or two more questions. So we can, I want to hear from our panelists as it relates to this question, and then we'll move on. But if we can try to keep our answers brief, so we can try to get through a couple more before we open it up to the group. But did anyone want to touch on the question on the floor now that we just posed, which was, what needs to shift? Is it funding, philanthropy, or policy? And are there certain models or partnerships that you all have been engaged in that can help contribute to our collective work?
Um, I'll take a stab at this. I'm going to just to be different because I want to be different right now. It's going to be more in the drinking water policy space, and I would say like there needs to be more funding for drinking water infrastructure. And one of these things I will call it, I refer to it as a scheme, is just because the federal government has not invested into water and sanitation infrastructure for like over 40 years. Like it has opened the door for I would say like profiteers, like corporations who is in the business of privatizing public water systems, and like these public-private partnerships. You may hear that, or P3s, or whatever the knack they want to throw around. Like that has never worked. Like there has never been a successful model of that, and it really kind of like shifts the accountability to um, shareholders. And so it's not like corporations are doing this so they can generate a profit. And so like a profit making model is like not in alignment with like providing services. And so that's where you have, I would say, like what happened in the city of Pittsburgh and their drinking water crisis. And there's been like, several where, like you have these corporations coming in, Veolia, which is like the largest one. That is, I would say, like that is like one thing, and I would say the other thing is like philanthropy, because this is a time to be bold. Because like we've been talking about environmental justice and this whole time, and environmental, like let's be real, is under attack right now from the federal government. Like philanthropy needs to like be bold and not try to like comply, because like what is the federal government going to do about that? Like really nothing. They're just trying to see if folks going to be in alignment. So I feel like there needs to be more funding for like these long-term impacts, because like with the Flint water crisis, like like the pipe replacement is like one aspect, but there is like these long-term impacts, just like we're seeing with other type of public health crises, that there needs to be additional resources and support for folks who have been impacted and have their lives upended um, by something that they did not have any type of agency around.
Thank you. Now, Darren, did you want to take a stab at that one before I want to throw one more question out before we open it up to the.
Go to the
Okay,
next one. We go to the next question. Yeah.
okay, cool. I'm gonna give you all kind of tie two questions into one. Okay, so um, last question I want to ask you all is again about policy, right? And so I think we touched on a little bit of this, but I want to ask what policy opportunities or openings or collective strategies that you all are seeing right now that we should be moving on together. And I want to tie that in with a concrete action, right? So again, what policies, strategies that you all are excited about, and then what's the call to action that you all want to leave with the people here today?
I could dive in and kind of weave in some of the stuff folks not familiar with us we're working on doing so. Really, we're at the cusp of JustAir. We're really leading this whole space on air quality sensors and how do we organize that data, unify the information, make sure it's transparent, accessible, and reliable for communities, and to make sure it's not community data versus government data, but we really have a unified platform where we're talking about the same data and investigating the same questions. So we're really leading charge in that, and really have some exciting announcements coming up, which leads me to the policy question, with agencies who are on a cutting edge or a little bit more advanced. I could speak to. So we look at in California, AB 617, and they all have their challenges with all the different agencies. However, they're on the forefront. A lot of agencies follow them, or have the choice to follow them on how they actually ensure that cumulative impact is in is considered in any air quality permit, right? And obviously they're dealing with forest fires and all kind of things, some of the wildfires and a lot of things that are happening over there. But our strategy at JustAir is like, okay, how do we really build this state-of-the-art platform from a software side and to give everybody context in air quality space is like I'm at a conference right now. It is shocking coming from a software background and like all the apps we use for banking, Instagram, you name it, to how antiquated things are that handle our data that are literally on pen and paper, and these processes have not been updated, and how that actually contributes to the lack of infrastructure or the lack of real-time infrastructure that we have and what we're seeing that also impacts policy. So I would have caveat that. So by really adding, this real, advanced technical layer on air quality sensors is really making sure our community data is defensible and standardized to where it can hold up in court, right? So that's the goal one. And so when we look at Massachusetts, for example, a state that has cumulative impact law, what the governor is really looking at, cumulative impact for any air quality permits, and they have an air sensor network that's community led. I think there's a real strategic opportunity, and then again, I'm throwing really just shoot my three right here, is a better neighbor effect. If we see an air quality permit pass in our community here in Michigan, can we model out what that air quality permit pass in this state over here in the zip code? Given the context. And then if not, why is that the case? What policy gaps are there? What barriers, what placeholders do we have from a policy standpoint that allows for something to happen here but not happen over there? And I think that's a strategic way, kind of this better neighbor play, where we can hopefully get some grounds on that we've seen happen in other states. So I'll leave it at that. We're seeing a lot of that in the Northeast. Yeah.
No, thanks, Darren, for touching on that. I think we've both been, really vocal about is how do we better utilize that collective power, to your point, cross state, but even internally within the state, right? I think we've been more intentional about that, but still a lot of work to do in terms of us not going into our different silos and addressing this in a more collective way. Nayyirah, what's anything you got in terms of policy opportunities, collective strategies, and call to action?
Yeah, I would say there's kind of three things. In Michigan, in response to like all of the water issues, like not only like in Flint, but in Detroit, with the water shutoffs, like we have had like, I would say like a different iterations of a bill package. And one of the most current iterations is, like around drinking water affordability, because like water is unaffordable for folks, and people should not have their water shut off due to inability to pay. And so that is something that, is moving at the state level. And I would say like at the federal level, like there is like the Water Act, that is, like that is, I would say kind of similar, at the state levels. I mean, at the federal level. And I was like, one of the other things is like, in the state of Michigan during COVID, like we had passed a moratorium on water shutoffs, through like our state's executive order. And so I would say like that's something that needs to move, like at every state. And one of the things that we were able to get like at the like during COVID was like a water version of LIHEAP. So it was like the low income water assistance program that would pay a portion of the bill to prevent water shutoffs. And in this country, like we see water as a commodity. It is currently being traded at water futures on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. And so like we have to like ensure that water is a human right. And even though that there is a UN declaration that has not been ratified, by the United States, so like these declarations have to be ratified, and it is not. A lot of things have not at the United States there's not a human right. The United States does not recognize a human right to a lot of things, including water. So I would encourage people to contact their congressional reps to make sure that we do have kind of like these human rights ratified, so we can like when these things are not provided, like we have some standing in court. Check.
Thank you, Nayyirah. I appreciate you sharing some of those tangible, policies that are on the floor right now, and encouraging folks to reach out to our legislators. Right, they work for us. Sometimes it feels like they forget that, but it's up to us to hold them accountable. And so, thanks for sharing that. We still have some time left. I want to go ahead and shift now. We got a small enough room to where we can jump into a little Q&A. And so there's a couple different ways. If you have questions that you'd like to ask our panelists, you can either put them directly in the chat. Our team will gather those and ask those of the panelists. I think, with the small room, we could even allow folks to, if you want to come off camera and come off mute and ask your questions directly, feel free to do so. But if you could, as you ask your question, introduce yourself, maybe where you are, where you reside, and what organization you represent. If you're here on behalf of an organization, before you get into your question, that would be great. So anyone have any questions, comments, or just any follow-up as it relates to the conversation today? All
I
right.
can ask a
Nobody.
question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Is that
Oh, here.
go ahead. Well, go ahead.
Letitia?
Hi, I'm Natisha. I work for an organization called the Breathe Project. And we have some organizations that distribute air filters and water filters. And I know that's like a hard resource to get a lot of times. But if that is a resource that has been accessible to y'all, have you seen any changes in how people's quality of life has been, or seen the impacts of people having those filters that live in your communities?
Thank you, Natisha. Any insights, or what would you all say as it relates to that? Air filters, water filters, and maybe positive or negative impacts that you all see.
I would say like the negative, and I would say this like as like we had advocated like for as part of like the response around like water filters, and the other thing is like like we were trying to stop like a asphalt a hot mix asphalt plant, and we had sued the EPA, and we entered into negotiations. One of the things we were trying to get um were like indoor like indoor air filters. And I would say one of the disadvantages is like the maintenance, the ongoing cost of that. Like the water filters maybe not so much, but I would say that like that, and then the education of those things, because like they can, especially like if folks have like other financial challenges, like it's not going to be something that is prioritized on how they're going to be spending their limited resources. So having a steady stream to take on that burden is critical.
Thanks, Nayyirah. Darren, Sergio, anything have you all experienced or been seeing the water filters, air filters in your community, and maybe any insights you could share there? If not, we can move on. But great question, Natisha. I know that there are some organizations engaged here in Grand Rapids in some of the just getting those out to community. I think some of the things that I've heard, if I could jump in really quick, is just like I think there's a benefit to it, but oftentimes it's looked at as like this is a reactive solution, and it's not necessarily a preventative measure, I should say. And I know a lot of folks are contributing their energy to more preventative, proactive measures. But um, um, thank you for that question, Natisha. Any other questions from the audience for our panelists?
I do have a question, but I want to yield the floor to anyone else.
No, I think it's on you, Katrina. Go ahead.
Okay, cool. So my question is for our panelists, of course. A lot of what I hear, like when I just have like conversations with people, a lot of times like the conversation is like, well, we sick and tired of being sick and tired. You know, it's like, where do we get this encouragement, all this kind of stuff. So like, what are some words that you can share with people? Because I think right now under the new administration, or what we see with like where there was once funding for environmental issues, and now the funding might look a little different. A lot of people are just feeling scared. A lot of people have felt like we've been fighting this fight for so long. So like, how do you keep waking up and you're like just as energized, and you know that it's just as important to do the work?
I love it jumping right here. You hit on something that actually brought up a memory for me. I was at the Southern Environmental Justice Conference with some of the folks who been doing this work for kind of started the whole EJ movement, and just seeing kind of elders stand on stage and talk about what's going on right now and what they had to go through, literally getting arrested, for stuff in North Carolina. The Reverend down in North Carolina around the PCB, which kind of sparked a lot of the EJ stuff, decades ago. It is eye-opening for me to see them saying like, "Oh, we've been here before. There have been moments." I mean, this funding cycle is unprecedented, but it's gone on and off on a hot code, and EJ. And one thing that the Robert Bullard said, kind of he's not told as the father of environmental justice, mentioned, which I thought was a good way to say, is that it's a marathon sprint. So they live their whole life, and I think kind of saddens me, but also like is what gets me up in the morning. That imagine going that hard your whole life, fighting for something that you may not be able to even see, justice being achieved. And that's why it says a marathon sprint, because when I get down, I'm passing the baton and you got to go in your marathon. So it's like for folks who've been doing it, and, when literally getting thrown in jail and on the road, and, laying down for stuff, it's like, who am I to, that's what motivates me. It's like, I gotta really, step up and do what people gave us, a platform to do so. So hope that's helpful. Without getting choked up.
No, I appreciate that, Darren. Oh, and I was just going to say the marathon continues, right? And I'm glad that you brought up the historical, those folks' shoulders who we stand on, right? Think of Dr. Robert Bullard and Dr. Beverly Wright, and good friend of mine who introduced me to this work back in 2019, the late Bob Ross, who was the longtime president of the Prince George County chapter of the NAACP. A lot of folks don't know our, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the night before he was assassinated, was in Memphis, advocating for environmental protections for sanitation workers there. So I think it's important that we, understand our history and understand the work that has brought us here. And so I'm glad that you touched on that. Now you look like you got something.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just thinking about our ancestors, like our ancestors dreamed of freedom and instilled that into us, like knowing that they probably would never like actually visualize and be in it. And I would just say like that because it is something like, like we're like when you are fighting for liberation, like you're fighting knowing that you may not ever experience it. So it's basically we move as far as we can collectively, and we're bringing like the younger generation along so they can take over, like that marathon, like a relay race. Like we're fighting, fighting out at that little layer of a relay. Like you passing the baton to the people behind you, then they're gonna take over.
That's solid. No, I appreciate it. No, that was powerful, you all. I know we are just right at about time. We may have time for one more quick question. Oh, it looks like we got one in the chat. So I'll read it. Um, Halima has a question. She wants to direct this directly to Sergio, and others can add. And so the question is, as a fellow immigrant doing justice work here in the U.S., she's deeply aware of the emotional weight that comes with holding truth, especially when that truth is about harm that affects our own bodies, our families, and our communities. You mentioned something earlier that really resonated with her, and she believes that many of us are doing this work not just as organizers and researchers, but as people whose bodies have become the evidence, right? Who've been directly impacted. And so, with that said, how do you hold that emotional toll? What care do you build around yourself and your community when the data doesn't always lead to change, but instead confirms what you already feared? That's a loaded question, Sergio. I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are.
Um, thank you for that question. Something that I've had to reference a few times, even just yesterday, is our transformative leadership program. One of the topics that we cover is this concept of the battle of imagination, and that we're in the midst of a battle of imagination as to what what the opposition can imagine and what we can imagine, like whether it's a tax system, like rich people are imagining creative ways to not pay taxes and paying zero taxes, right? And why aren't we thinking that way, right? Or the opposition, like anticipating our every move and us thinking like in antiquated ways to organize or like to fight back against oppression, and whether that's working or not. And so that comes to mind, and when I think of like something that inspires me to move forward or to keep going, like as an immigrant and especially with this administration. And when I say that because to make noise nowadays could land someone like me in El Salvador in a prison that I'm never gonna leave, right? And so I think about like how what we're leaving on the table and what ideas, what concepts were like we've taken for granted, and what things we're still counting on as if they're still there. And I think that it's going to get worse before it gets better. I think when Nayyirah said about like sometimes we're fighting for things that we're never going to see, and being real with ourselves, accepting that if things are going to get worse first, what is our role then? And and something that comes to mind is redefining, saying that it's going to take a village, but what does that mean nowadays? It means that people aren't going to come to save us, that we can no longer count on our systems, and that we have to rely on mutual aid and what we can do for each other. Like, how are we going to keep our families and our people safe? What kind of economies are we creating that are proof recession proof, or that are safe from like what the government might want to do to us? How are we going to start to think going forward with this new reality of this new government that's taking over? Like, how can we protect our family and our close and our loved ones? And what kind of peace of mind will that give us? And like being ready, like are we like homesteading? Are we prepping? Are we doing all these things that are going to get us ready for the future? And then what kind of ideas are we thinking of? Like what kind of imagination? Like are we bringing the brightest minds of our community? And something that comes to mind is Octavia Butler's like Parables of the Sowers, and thinking of like Afrofuturism and sci-fi as a way to reimagine futures in which we are victorious. And so how can we adapt this mentality of creativity to come up with solutions in which we win, in which we um, are one step ahead of the opposition, as opposed to reacting to the opposition as they continue to oppress us? And that's something that gives me um, hope for moving forward. But I know that to some extent there's some loss and acceptance of like uh, of how our past reality is no longer going to be with us, and how we move forward with our eyes in the future and what needs to happen for us to survive.
And that was powerful. That was a super powerful question, Halima. I think that was a great way to close this out. I regret to inform you all that we are just at about time. It felt like the conversation was just getting into the nitty gritty. Well, we may have to do a part two of this. So many great insights shared. I'm extremely appreciative of each of you to take out of your time today. I know everybody looks like they're traveling in some capacity, and so I appreciate you all for being willing to be here, and I appreciate your friendship and being able to work alongside you all. And so before we go ahead and close out, I know that we had a few calls to action. There's a few. Maybe we'll pull up again, thank you to our panelists. We're going to make sure that after the webinar, we'll send out kind of a resource kit and we'll make sure to include contact information for our panelists if you want to connect with them outside of this. But thank you again to all of you. Last but not least, calls to action, right? How can you help support? Again, we love your support here at the Cancer Free Economy Network. We'll throw some links in the chat where you can donate to the organization. There's also several other efforts. There's a event that you can co-sponsor that one of my partners I'm working close with, the Climate Action Campaign, is hosting. I believe it's tomorrow. There's a national virtual event that really is going to highlight efforts in, unfortunately, efforts to revert some of the things that are happening at the federal level. There's sign-on letters. We encourage you to check us out at our social media platforms as well. And again, just I encourage you to identify ways in your own communities that you can help support as well. As this conversation was hyper focused on Michigan, the work exists everywhere in your communities as well. So connect with us, our panelists. We can help direct you to organizations who are doing the work. And with that said, we are actually over a minute, but there are several links in the chat where you can get involved. There's petitions you can sign. There's one specifically that was just put in the chat called the Save Clean Energy petitions. And so we'll make sure to include all these links and resources in the resource guide. But with that said, I would be remiss to not thank the team who's helped support putting this together. Katura, my partner and co-lead on behalf of Building Power. Halima, Andre, appreciate you all for all your support. And last but not least, again, huge thank you to all of our panelists, Nayyirah, Darren, and Sergio, for building community and taking out the time to be with us. And so with that said, we'll go ahead and prepare to close out. And again, thank you all for joining us. And also, we'll make sure to have this video posted on the Cancer Free Economy YouTube here in the next week or so you can cycle it through your networks. And with that said, we'll close out. Thank you all again, and stay tuned. There's more to come. I'll close with that. The Building Power Node will be hosting a series of these webinars moving forward, and so stay tuned for more information there. Katura, you got anything else you want to go ahead and close us out?
Yes, just wanted to add something I mentioned in the chat. I know I asked an emotional question, but just remembering that amidst all of the information that we've shared, this is a selfless fight, but it's a collective fight nonetheless, and we are united in strength and information. And I think of you all as comrades in this fight. So I'm so excited to have started this conversation with you all, but the work is not finished. And just thank you all for joining. Can't wait to the next webinar. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you all.